crisis. This forum is being presented by the ACLU Southern California Economic Justice Committee, co-sponsored by the ACLU SoCal Pasadena Foothills Chapter, Dignity and Power Now, Human Rights Watch, LA Progressive, and Western Regional Advocacy Project. My name is Sharon Kyle, and I am the co-chair, along with Dick Price, of the Southern California Economic Justice Committee and a board member of the ACLU of Southern California. Also, I am the publisher of the LA Progressive. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a land and labor acknowledgement. In a moment, I will be introducing you to our moderator, and we'll be heading on into the program. But I'd like to start with an acknowledgement, because much of what we have and enjoy in this country, including its culture, economic growth, and development, was unfortunately made possible by the brutal taking of both land and labor. Let me first acknowledge the land. We practice land acknowledgement to honor the past, present, and future land stewardship and rich cultural contributions of Indigenous peoples whose territory we now inhabit. Territory many Indigenous nations continue to call home. As part of our evolving process, we also speak into this space an acknowledgement for the contributions made by the people of the African diaspora. Uncompensated, back-breaking forced labor made through brutal torture, enslavement, and other forms of past and present exploitation. This acknowledgement serves as a reminder that we must rectify the past and present colonial violence inflicted upon these people. It's really important for us to also be mindful of our language. In doing this work, we should honor and respect all coalition partners and those heavily impacted communities. For this reason, we work at being intentional about the language we use. Tonight, you'll hear us use terms like unhoused people or houselessness to avoid terms that historically been used in disrespectful ways. Not referring to any category of people as trying to use people-centered language that is not othering. Using terms like mental health conditions instead of ableist terms. Also avoiding ableist language like take a stand, and instead using more inclusive terms like take action. Okay, now let me just take care of some housekeeping before I get into introducing our moderator. As I've said, we're recording this webinar, but there is also live transcription services that are being provided throughout the program. All you have to do is click at the bottom, the CC, the closed caption button. The closed caption, if you click, there will be an up arrow at the bottom, and you'll have the choice to view the captions as subtitles or to view them as a transcript, which will show in the sidebar. Now let's get into what is Care Court. Why are we all here? This so-called Care Court is a framework proposed by Governor Newsom, the administration, that aims to establish new civil courts in every county in California. These courts, which would primarily target unhoused community members, would subject people with mental health disabilities or substance use conditions to court-ordered treatment. It is codified in bill form as Senate Bill 1338, which was introduced by Senators Umberg and Eggman and touted by many liberal mayors. The bill already successfully moved through the Senate. Last week, it just passed through the Assembly Judiciary Committee with only one no vote. Tomorrow, Tuesday, it will be voted on in its last committee hearing at the Assembly Health Committee. This bill is not actually about care. It is a statewide sweep of unhoused people and a gross violation of civil rights. As our panelists will discuss, the bill will lead to the unnecessary institutionalization of people with disabilities and unhoused people and civil rights violations. It will perpetuate racism. It will have a chilling effect. The governor's proposal falls short of real solutions that guarantee housing. Instead, this proposal will likely create a chilling effect that prevents people from seeking supportive services for fear of being institutionalized. Now let me introduce you to our deeply knowledgeable and well-versed moderator, Jody Armour. Sorry, I messed up your name, Jody. Jody is a professor of law at the University of Southern California and a ACLU Southern California board member. Professor Armour's expertise ranges from personal injury claims to claims about the relationship between racial justice, criminal justice, and the rule of law. Professor Armour studies the intersection of race and legal decision-making, as well as torts and tort reform movements. A widely published scholar and popular lecturer, he has published extensively in leading law journals and books. Professor Armour often appears as a legal analyst on NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, KPCC, KCRW, and a variety of other alphabet letters. Thank you for being with us tonight, Jody. Ladies and gentlemen, Jody Armour.
Thanks so much, Sharon. It really is an honor to be able to talk with this really distinguished panel about this crucial and urgent issue. I only have 5 to 6 minutes, and I came in when we were talking before we went on about trying to keep within our time limit so we can get around to lots of questions. So I'm going to try to cram as much as possible into the next 4 or 5 minutes. We've been here before. Safer Cities Initiative, 2006, LA decided it was going to solve the homelessness problem by cracking down on the down and out and putting more police in the nickel and skid row than in any other area in the country, heavily policed, citation. The idea was we're going to fix the broken people that are the stuff that houselessness is made of, because houselessness is not about lack of affordable housing or lack of jobs or lack of adequate health care. It's about people lacking personal responsibility. And we need to teach them personal responsibility. This was explicitly, right, the program folks, and I was talking to them and we were arguing back in those days about, no, therapeutic policing is not the route. And the idea was, we're not cracking down on people for any retributive reasons, right? A lot of people think of the carceral system as directed at punishment of those people who are viewed as evil in some way and having done wrong. Rather, this therapeutic policing model says we're punishing, or rather we are citing and then making you live according to these strict requirements in order to get out from under the site or go into the prison system. We're doing it not for retribution, but for rehabilitation. We're just looking out. We do it because we care. We're being punitive because we care. Therapeutic policing, therapeutic incarceration if necessary. And it was, all I can say, folks, is men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Look at the math. Look at how much the houselessness problem grew worse while we funneled literally hundreds of millions of dollars, not only in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, right on up. Safer Cities Initiative, throwing good money after bad. And now we find ourselves in a much worse condition than when we started that punitive approach. And so a lot of what we're going to have to tackle is the kind of mentality that led to that Safer Cities approach that was a dismal failure, but that we insist on revisiting. It's like racial injustice Groundhog Day, poor people injustice Groundhog Day. We keep waking up to the same set of problems, and they keep using the same broken, ineffective solutions to try to address them. Care court, all right? And I think that it's relevant at this time to think about this issue in terms of a holiday that just passed, the federal holiday, Juneteenth. Because at some point, we're going to talk about today the fact that when you walk through, for example, Skid Row, highest concentration of houseless folk in America, as far as I know, it's 75% Black, right? The most maligned and marginalized people in this nation are Black folk. They're disproportionately in Skid Row, and you go to the prisons, you see also the same kind of demography, the two most miserable places in America. And, on Juneteenth, we were talking about, the point of Juneteenth was focusing our attention not just on formal equality, but the systemic and structural factors that make up the legacy of racism that has extended itself from slavery to this present moment. So when we're looking at people in Skid Row, we're not just looking at hapless victims of circumstance who should be pitied. Rather, we're looking at symptoms of our own social injustice. We're looking at people whose plight we are in complicity with the creation of, right? And that is uncomfortable for a lot of us. That's the uncomfortable part of this conversation. And we're gonna have to get around to that and other things. And finally, I'm gonna say that when you do start to cast it in you see the racial dimensions of it, I start to worry, especially about our ability to effectively respond to this problem, because Reagan learned and others that when you put a black face on people in distress, other people feel less sympathy and empathy for them. He did that with the black welfare queen driving up in her Cadillac to get her check in 1980. That was his trope that he came into office with. And both parties eventually started marching in lockstep with a lot of that kind of vision of, these programs are disproportionately black. They put a black face on them. Well, in some of the research I've looked at, when you put a black face on people who are in distress, there's an empathy deficit for them. Think of Hurricane Katrina in the 9th Ward with those black victims with water up to their necks, literally. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days go by. There's no panic of empathy to help them. And there's a lot of research that suggests that there's a lack of empathy when it comes to outgroup members. I won't go into all that, but it also complicates this problem. So with that as a backdrop, let me go now to first you, Shanique Williams. Shanique, you're leading. Oh, hold on. I need to first make sure that folks have some sense of, man, this is totally my bad. How distinguished these folks we're getting ready to hear from are, how much they thought about these questions. Shanique Williams is No Care Court, part of No Care Court Coalition, following a wrongful conviction that led to a 2-year prison sentence. Shanique Williams has dedicated herself to advocating for social justice reform. She accredits her passion regarding advocacy to the knowledge that influence and representation is powerful in affecting change. As a community leader, Shanique believes that one must be a representation of the community being served. Susan Misner. Susan Misner is the director of the ACLU Disability Rights Program, which she founded in 2012. The Disability Rights Program litigates cases, introduces and supports legislation, and coordinates with national and state ACLU offices on disability rights litigation and policy. Prior to the ACLU, Ms. Misner directed the San Francisco Mayor's Office on Disability, coordinated the Bar Association of San Francisco's Poverty and Disability Rights Project, and advocated for unhoused people with disability. I've just talked about the racial justice dimension of this issue. The disabilities dimension is humongous too. It's right there, right? We can't consider one without the other. And Paul Bowden, executive director of the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Mr. Bowden became unhoused at the age of 16. He began volunteering at a drop-in shelter in San Francisco in 1983, eventually becoming a program director and then a case manager for people with mental health conditions. Paul served as executive director of San Francisco's Coalition on Homelessness. And we just talked about the houselessness, homelessness point that Sharon brought up, right? And we should strive to, to honor that distinction while also recognizing that, that other term, homeless, has been around a long time. People are going to fall into it sometimes. Organizations have names after it. We're in a transition period. And so, we should strive and be conscientious, but, also recognize we still got a ways to go. For 16 years, and was a founder of the Community Housing Partnership, a nationally recognized permanent housing corporation with optional support services. He has received dozens of awards for his work in the community. So terrific. That's the background. Sorry about that. Not starting that right off of that. But now let's go to Shanique Williams, please. We just heard, Shanique, about how dangerous this proposal could be. For those of us or you who are restless to take action, what can we do now in addressing these questions? Why is the care court such a dangerous proposal in people's eyes? And how do you envision the movement moving forward? In 3 minutes or less, Shonique, I'm sorry.
It's good. So a lot of these things are going to be discussed by other panelists. I don't have to dive deep into them. I just want to state that it was very important for me as founding the space of No Care Court Coalition. It was very important to amplify a Black voice in this space because we were not included in the original conversation. However, it is important to note that Black community members will be those disproportionately harmed, as Black community members are the ones that find themselves at most risk for misdiagnoses of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and other psychotic disorders. So just keeping that in mind, this is a very intentional, creative space. And with that, this space has been led by Black and Brown voices and allies, and it has been a very beautiful, tremendous thing that has happened in No Care Court. I would like to take the moment to just acknowledge Assemblymember Kalra. As we were originally told starting this work that there would be no elected official that would go up against Governor Newsom, that Governor Newsom wants this bill for his own political agenda. And because of that, other folks in this process, in the legislative process, would be fearful to speak out in opposition. And so I just know that it means a lot for someone to stand up and to put their political agenda aside, such as Assemblymember Kalra did, and to just speak to the truths of this bill. Not one senator, not one assembly member that I have spoken with, I have spoken to all of the senators, and I am working my way through the assembly, have acknowledged this as being a good bill, have acknowledged this as being a good idea. They have all, and I'm saying all, that I have spoken to, and we can go back and forth, that I have spoken to have said that they know that this bill is harmful to Black and Brown community members. So that's something to keep in mind as we're even thinking about the elections coming up, because every single one of them have said this, and they're still moving forward with the hopes and the ideas that perhaps some amendments will be made that will be significant enough to reduce and mitigate the harm. And let me be very clear, you cannot reduce, you cannot mitigate, and you cannot amend the harm of SB 1338. You literally have to kill this bill and start with something fresh and brand new, bringing the right people to the table. Because as I said in my biography, which is actually written years ago, but it still holds true today, you cannot be representative of a community that which you did not come from. You cannot speak to my harms as a Black woman. I know many of you probably heard me speaking in the judiciary hearing. Shout out to Assemblymember Stone for igniting that fire in me, because you cannot speak to my experience as a Black woman, wrongfully convicted, sexual assault survivor, domestic violence survivor. You can't speak to those things. You may be able to sympathize with me, but you may not be able to empathize with me. I wasn't even aware that my other panelist, Paul Bowden himself, has also experienced houselessness. The first time I was unhoused, I was 15 years old. And no one knows those fears and those dangers and those concerns being out there unless you are the one out there, and what it looks like to worry about where your next meal is going to come from, where you're going to safely lay your head. I'm a small woman, very mighty, but I'm a small woman. I'm 5 foot tall. When I was unhoused at 15 years old, that was the first time in which I was gang raped. Nobody understands those experiences. I knew my mental health was in jeopardy. I knew I needed to take care of my mental health, even though I didn't understand those terms at 15 years old, but that was not my concerns. I wanted safety. I wanted a house. I wanted food. I wanted love. I wanted support. I wanted resources. I wanted tools. So if we really want to do something to support unhoused communities, those of us impacted by mental health disability, that would be where we start. And so I know there's a whole lot of questions that are going to come out on today. So I just want to take time to give some of the gist of that, because I know that folks are very much so interested in the amendments that have been made. Some folks are alluding to, well, X amount of amendments, so they're listening to you all. No, there was amendments made today. I've read through every single one of them. It's literally just another attempt at gaslighting, manipulating of words, just another way to misconstrue the community. There is no reason that someone should be considered a supporter, but they are not being funded the support to take care of these communities. As we all know that our advocates out here, boots on the ground, we do not have enough money and resources to take care of the folks that are voluntarily receiving services. services. So why strip that money from us and then ask us to provide voluntary services to the 7,000 to 12,000 people that judges and police officers are going to be funded to take care of, but then us that are boots on the ground, we don't get funding for that. We don't get support for that. So with that, I will digress until more questions and comments come out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just insert just one thing here? Questions are coming through, and I just wanted to tell the audience, please continue to post your questions. When we get towards the end of the presentation, we'll address the questions, or we might have to answer your questions via an email, but please continue to send your questions in. Thank you.
All right, Susan, as a leading expert on disability rights, what is the governor missing here, right? Why will this be ineffective? What is the problem with this proposal?
So Shanique has identified the issue. You've identified the issue. There's no lot that I need to add to it. You know, we know what works. We know that housing first works. We know that patient and persistent outreach works. We know that harm reduction works. And we know that we currently don't have nearly enough money for any of those things in the system. We can't afford to spend money on this incredibly ridiculous bureaucracy that is just going to add more hoops, that is just going to stigmatize and criminalize more people. The thing that I want to just try and integrate into the conversation is the way that poverty and disability and race are intertwined. As Paul knows, and Paul was one of my first teachers in this space, disability impoverishes and poverty disables. And within communities of color, poverty is much higher. We know the wealth gap, and we know the systemic racism that created the wealth gap. And so we have this systemic problem of increased disability and increased perceptions of disability, as Shanique's pointed out, that there are perceptions that behavior that is different than what is used to is mental illness. That's not always the case. One of the other things that I just need to point out is how expensive the ultimate result is here. Like the ultimate result that people are shooting for is putting people under conservatorship, right? That we put them into a locked ward. And the LPS conservatorships are supposed to be only for 1 year, but they cost, I've looked up contracts that the state has with these locked facilities, and the least expensive ones are still more than $100,000 a year. The most expensive ones are over $500,000 a year per person. So the money that we are spending through this incredibly unnecessary court system and then locking people up in these institutions would be much more effectively spent by increasing the services, housing, and supports that we know have been effective. As you said, Jody, the data doesn't lie, right? We can make a difference if we put our resources in the right place. I'm happy to try and answer other questions, but I'm going to just pass to Paul because I know we're a little bit behind schedule.
Great, yes, Paul, could you pick up?
Sure, I can jump in. So, I mean, I think one of the important things to remember here is when you look in the youth guidance system, when you look in the foster care system, when you look at taking people's kids away in the child care system, when you look at our prisons, when you look at our jails, when you look at our shelters, when you look in our streets, it's the same people. It's like there's no doubt the double consciousness that DeBose talked about is because where none are portrayed as to who they actually are as human beings. They're portrayed as them and others and dangerous and and infliction. And we talk about the cost of housing versus the cost of incarceration, or the cost of foster care versus the cost of family unification. And it doesn't matter. It's who's making the profit on where the money's going. And Gavin Newsom has been a master since he was at the Board of Supervisors with care, not cash. Care courts, care, not cash. Like, there's a trend here, and it's the same staff working on both campaigns. This is a political campaign that is harming and oppressing and endangering the lives of poor people, whether they're homeless, whether they have a mental health challenge, whatever. Like, this is about othering them in order to achieve a political goal. And this is not unique. Clinton and welfare reform, Gingrich and his crap. Like, this is not the first time. Ugly laws in the 1860s was all about disabled people. Like, this is not unique. And at some point, I think our organizing has to get human rights focused enough to not, like, we have mental health courts, substance abuse courts, community courts, behavioral health courts, conservatorship courts, family courts, foster care courts. Like, we have all of these court systems around social justice, social humanity issues, and yet we screw people over. We deny, we commodify housing and treatment and education. And then we say to the people themselves, well, you ain't accessing the stuff because you're not trying hard enough, when everybody knows that that's complete and total BS.
Let me just ask Susan real quickly, because again, we're back to math. I'm just at a loss when you give me those kinds of numbers, how anyone who is, I'm talking now, not about the people I've been seen in the streets and been fighting for years. I'm talking about people who embrace the label conservatives. I'm talking about people like Newt Gingrich, who I remember standing at a table just before COVID and saying, this is going to surprise some people in the room. I know it's going to surprise Professor Harmon, but if I had my druthers as a right on crime advocate, I would have nobody serving time for nonviolent offenses at all. Right? That's the right on crime. There's a whole right on crime crowd that isn't in it about compassion for human frailty, fiscal responsibility, just straight ahead, right? And so it's really astonishing just from that standpoint. We're pursuing a wildly inefficient way, a path. But let's talk about not just efficiency but efficacy. Susan, and what is the efficacy of voluntary versus involuntary kinds of confinement like this, or treatment?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, intuitively, I think we can all understand that coercion, when you are trying to work with a trusted medical professional, is counterproductive. If my doctor says, take this medicine, I'm going to lock you up, I'm going to run screaming from the office, right? And the data shows that is also true. Multiple studies have shown that coerced treatment is no more effective than voluntary treatment, that patient and persistent outreach is what is effective. I would venture that many of the people who are on the street today avoid treatment because they've been coerced in the past, because their experience with treatment is involuntary, is being hauled off in a van, is being detained without any opportunity to state their case, is being locked up. And that is a very traumatic experience. That adds to people's trauma and often adds to the mental health crisis. So the effectiveness of coercion is also part of the problem. It's not just the effectiveness of where you're putting your money, It's the effectiveness of the approach. And virtually any therapist, any professional therapist is going to tell you that for therapy to be effective, you need what's called a therapeutic alliance, which is just a fancy way of saying that the person being treated and the person providing the treatment have a good relationship, that the patient trusts who's treating them, that the patient believes that who is treating them is going to listen to them, is going to respond to their needs. And as a person with a disability and having had lots of medical care, I can tell you, this doesn't only happen in mental health care, but it happens the most in mental health care. So we are back to data, right? Just all continually going back to the evidence. The evidence shows that coerced treatment is no more effective. The law says that you have to try the least restrictive approaches, the least restrictive options before you do coercion. And we haven't had the money to do that. So I legally believe this is a risky approach.
Thanks, Shoni. Care court, care. We cuff you because we care. Right. That's what they seem to be saying. There's something almost Orwellian about it, but it seems to be effective political rhetoric, right? It somehow seems to work on a good number of people. And so can you help us with that, how it is, that proponents will say, oh, it's something like, the velvet fist in the iron glove rather than the other way around. That's right. Our approach. How is it? Is the road to hell paved with coercive benevolence like that, Shonique? Or is there such a thing? Can we use the legal system? Can the affected communities expect to get care from the legal system?
So I come at this from many different angles, right? As I've touched in my previous statements. So not only am I an advocate for mental health, unhoused, domestic violence, and many things, I come from lived experience of mental health. I, currently am diagnosed with multiple disorders, wrongfully diagnosed for over 10 years with bipolar disorder, which was a direct result of childhood traumas and abuses that I was impacted with. So for me, when I hear this, it's very alarming, it's very scary, right? For someone to say that they care about you and to hurt you. Some people may not understand all of my messaging around, care court opposition, but this is very, very intentional. I would like for everybody here to clearly understand the first time I was sexually abused, I was 1 year old. That was a cousin and, a cousin in my family. The second time that, I was abused for the longest period of time was from the age of 3 to 13 years old. That was by my mother's husband, my stepfather. My mother was aware of the sexual abuse that I experienced. My mother did not protect me. My mother did not remove her husband from the home. She did not remove me from the home into a better space of care. In fact, when I finally told a friend at school, she told a teacher, and that is how Child Protective Services got involved. My biological mother was upset with me that I disclosed this family secret, and I was not able to step foot back into my biological mother's home at 13 years old when I came home from school crying because CPS had already went to my, biological mother's home. So for my mom, who was responsible for my care, she was under whatever her disillusions and her belief was that she was doing, quote unquote, the right thing. I say this to say that my mother was sexually abused growing up, and she was taught the exact same thing. You do not speak about what goes on in this house. You do not bring those white people in our business. You do not bring CPS into our business. So I say all that to say that some people, unfortunately, think that they're providing care when they're not. They're actually inflicting harm, and they're doing it from the space that they know best, or, that sometimes they don't even think that they know best. It's just their way to pervert justice and to continue a spectrum of harm. So when I think about care, I think it is very detrimental to mental health, to survivors such as myself, to not correlate forced treatment with care, to not correlate forced medication with care, because then someone that has experienced things such as myself and has not learned how to advocate for themselves and have not learned how to speak up for themselves, they will confuse that with care. And that's not care. I actually care about my community. I actually care about Black and brown lives. I actually care about all lives in actuality. So I'm not going to find myself saying, I care about you. So because I care about you, this is what you must do. And this is what you have to do because I said so. Nothing about that is care. That's actually dictatorship. That's actually, abuse. That is actually me dictating onto you what I think is best for you. So I can't correlate that to be care. Jody, if you ever come to me and say that you're battling with a certain something, I can give you my thoughts, I can give you my ideas, I can give you my opinions. But if I care about you, I actually have to ask you, what do you need? How can I help you? How can I service you? What resources would you like for me to pull together? And I can help you down your road of recovery and healing by offering that space to you. That's care. I don't have to force you to do that. I don't have to manipulate you to do that. I don't have to pretend that this is not forced treatment, because as we all watched that judiciary hearing, going back to Calra again, as he was asking very direct questions of Umberg was still alluding to the false illusion that this is voluntary treatment. But if you do not participate in your voluntary treatment, you're then forced into conservatorship. What about that is care? Because contrary to belief, I gave you guys that very raw, real personal story about my life, my personal life, because my mom, she's deceased now, but she will tell people she cared. She will tell people she loved me. She will. But how do you love your loved one when this is what you're taking them through? But for her, that is what she would call care based on many different things. So I look at this from a space of do not correlate the two. Your harm, your abuse, don't call that care and dress it up, because you're going to cause people to not want to reach out for services and support. So what Umberg and Newsom and Eggman are doing is very scary and detrimental for those of us that are actually providing real care and voluntary services, because it's going to cause people, as it was already said on this panel tonight, to not want to come to us for services, because they're going to be afraid that this is going to cause them to be locked into this system, which is an extension of the carceral system. It just is. It doesn't matter how you dress it up. It doesn't matter if you change it from care court to care act. It's still a court process. It's still a judge. It's still law enforcement. It's still attorneys. It's not care. There's just not a way there's just not a way to have care involved in this process. Actually, pour funding into organizations. I challenged folks in the past when I've spoken on this to take that 65 million of this original money and just give 1 million to just different organizations throughout the state of California that are actually doing this work. And I promise you, we are going to do some amazing things with it, because we actually care and we know what care looks like. Care looks like going into these houseless encampments and just continuing to give food on a daily basis, water, resources, and visiting regularly until that person makes a decision for him, her, or they self to come and to receive services from us. In the meantime, we're going to sit down with them and we're going to have conversations about whatever they want to, whether that's God, whether that's substance abuse, whether that's sexual abuse, domestic violence, whatever that person is experiencing, because we don't have a political agenda. We're doing it from our hearts, whether we have lived experience or not.
Let me push some of those points, Paul, and ask you to respond to somebody who hears what Shonique and Susan just said, but still says, the most compassionate thing is to just get people off the street who really lack the capacity to make choices about their own good, right? If that's you hear, I'm hearing two things out here, and I'd like to, just kind of that are almost shocking, but I'm running across them too much. So respond, if you could, to the idea that the claim that, if you're dealing with people with mental health issues, they have capacity problems, about making choice, about agency in the first place. So you can't just say, leave it to their choice when their choice has been compromised by their condition, right? On the one hand, so you have, how do you make sure that those people, recognize that, as Shonique is saying, carceral care is an oxymoron.
Yeah, no, I gotta say, doing like after 40 years, I've heard that a couple of times. And I will say it's complete and unadulterated bullshit. It's like we you know, at the Homeless Coalition and now at RAP and at LA Can down in Skid Row, like we don't do nothing without street outreach and making sure that whatever we're talking about is representing the voices of the people that live in our community. And we don't screen them. We don't like, it's just our community voices. And we talked to over 300 people in San Francisco, and 92% of the self-identified people with mental health challenges that they're dealing with that are unhoused have tried to access treatment and can't get in. And forget, like, and there's a whole critique around how long those that did get in were, like 2 to 4 months was the average length of time. You ain't doing treatment for anything, a broken leg, a broken arm. You ain't doing treatment in 2 to 4 months. Like that's just not how the public health system works. Now they call it behavioral health. That was the biggest crime of the century. Like when you talk about taking mental health and substance abuse treatment and saying it's about your behavior, you're delegitimizing the fact that this is a condition. This is a medical situation. This isn't about how am I behaving. Is my behaving upsetting you? My behavior? This is about I'm trying to seek treatment for an issue I'm dealing with. And you're talking about like, you're gonna help me by putting me in freaking jail? Come on, like that is jail is a carceral system. The threat of jail is a carceral approach. The non-options is a carceral option. Like, so if you're talking about you have thousands and thousands of people nationwide trying desperately to access treatment, trying desperately to access housing, and you change the criteria for who gets in. And Gavin Newsom was very famous for cutting off mental health service providers because Medicare reimbursement priorities changed. And suddenly they were told to get rid of all of their current clients and pick up a new pool of clients so San Francisco can get money. The word care shouldn't be attached to this stuff in any way, shape, or form. They don't care. Just like they didn't care with Care Not Cash. They don't care with care courts. This is about a political agenda to get brownie points to get reelected. And the real ugly part of this is the dude went from appointed by Willie Brown to the Board of Supervisors to getting elected mayor by doing Care Not Cash and sit-lie laws in San Francisco to lieutenant governor to governor. And he's done it on the backs of attacking poor and homeless people every step of the process. And when we look at these systems, the Collaborative Court Association, you know, anytime they've created a new association like supportive housing and all of these systems that have been created off of poverty and off of oppression, and these private prisons that have been created, and these rehabilitation, urban alchemy, and all these other systems that get created around we're helping poor people. And you look at where the profits are going, that tells you what the goal of this project is. And they don't care that it costs more to incarcerate and oppress people than it does to actually uplift and educate and provide treatment and housing for people. They care about where the money that they're spending is going. And it's going to their cronies and it's going to their friends. And if that means I gotta oppress the others in society, well, so be it. That's just the world of politics. And if the politicians don't go along with me, I'll make sure their bills never see the light of day. And that's what Newsom's doing in Sacramento right now, straight up. It's what he did in San Francisco. It's what he did to Caduceus Outreach Services. It's what he's done the whole political career that this sucker has had that was gifted to him by the Gettys and the Willie Browns of the world. That's just what it is.
If it, Susan, what Paul has just shared with us is a pretty grim and pessimistic view of where the political discourse may go from here, that, you know, the evidence-based stuff that you were talking about, the facts, the number crunching that just points in one clear direction, that isn't going to be able to affect policy in the way we want evidence to affect policy, and we want facts to affect policy, right? Facts aren't supposed to care about your feelings, but it sounds like what Paul is telling us is that the facts aren't going to penetrate the political interest that, you know, some people have in making sure that we maintain this less efficient fiscally status quo, so that certain people can benefit, materially and in other ways from the status quo. Is there any hope of breaking through in these policy debates, with real evidence-based, fact-driven, discourse? I've certainly had a lot of trouble with this in the criminal justice area, with respect to progressive prosecutors versus spikes in crime. And the numbers are never there to support any correlation between a progressive prosecutor and a spike in crime, but you still have to fight all this misinformation. So now here we are with another kind of misinformation. Is there a chance that it can cut through the dynamic that Paul was talking about?
I am always hopeful, but we are not in a political climate in which that has much basis in reality. We have a fact-free environment in our political world, and we have, with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, sort of removed the veil of just what people's agenda are, and bodily autonomy, whether it's a woman's ability to control her own body, whether it's a person who's on the streets' ability to control what happens to them, is not the priority these days. I will say that the country has been here before, and it has been worse than before. At the beginning of the 1900s, we had the eugenics movement, in which anyone who was perceived to be less desirable was first told they couldn't marry, right? Because we didn't want them to reproduce. When they were reproducing anyway, we locked people up in institutions. And when that became too expensive, we started sterilizing them. So the Lanterman-Petra Short Act, which is what this conservatorship is named after, was part of the social response to this. I am a big fan of the disability community's catchphrase, which is nothing about us without us. And to the extent that we can elevate more voices like Shaniqua's, more voices like Paul's, people who are actually experiencing what is happening to them, I think the better the chances are, especially in California, that we can beat this back. But it's an uphill battle.
Shanique, we've thought about this issue from the standpoint, from an interdisciplinary standpoint, right? Disability and race, early on we had to think about that interconnection. And now, that you brought up, Roe and its demise, thinking about gender as a part of this intersectional analysis and how gender fits into this whole big problem that we're talking about. Can you address that, please?
Yes, there's a few ways to bring that up. So I'm thankful that this has been brought up, because those of you that are following me on Twitter, I'll drop my Twitter up in there because it be getting lit over there, y'all. You cannot, Governor Newsom spoke out in his disgust for the overturn of Roe versus Wade. But it's very interesting to me as a woman that you can see the harms of attempting to police someone's uterus, but you do not see the harms of attempting to police someone's mental health. As a cisgender woman, I don't want you telling me what to do with my uterus, and I don't want you telling me what to do with my mental health, with my brain either. So why do you think there's a difference? Why do you think that autonomy should only refer to my uterus? Because, oh, wait a minute, that's politically correct. I see you, Governor Newsom. It's politically correct. I don't know if he really stands in support of, women's ability to choose, but I just think that its timing is everything. So of course, here in California, we would not ever stand for what some of these other unfortunate states are having to go through with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, because politically we wouldn't accept that. He also knows, I believe Governor Newsom knows, that politically California would not stand for knowing that there is forced treatment happening to its citizens, that there are non-citizens, that there is forced treatment happening to its community members, that there's forced medication. So he has to, Umberg, Eggman, and everyone involved has to manipulate the wording. So when I also think about this from the point of gender or not, Black men were disproportionately harmed by the 1994 crime bill. When the 1994 crime bill happened, there was an increase in crime. There was an increase in crime. There was an influx in gang violence, gun violence. We don't have the time to get into it today. I unfortunately have to tell you guys that every time I bring it up, but all I'm saying is Black community members did not bring crack cocaine into their own hoods. They didn't do that. Black community members did not bring their own guns into, first of all, they weren't going and getting guns legally. So they didn't have the ability to go and get guns and bring them into their own hoods in order to start a gang violence, Black on Black crime. They didn't have the ability to do that. That was brought into our communities by white Americans, but we have to digress from that conversation at this time. So what I will say is, just as we saw the disproportionate harm to Black men, specifically brown men, under the 1994 crime bill, we're going to see the same when it comes down to this bill. So for folks that are just not able to draw the connection, they're like, well, what is the difference of this and in jail? Isn't this better? It's not better. Have you ever been to a lockdown mental health institution? Have you ever been? It is literally the replica of a jail. It is literally the replica of a prison. These folks are not free to go. They are not free to move at their own liberty. They are told when to wake up, when to go to sleep. They are told when to eat. They are told when to shower, just like jail. So at the end of the day, when we think of it that way, but then we also think of women, right? Cisgender women. One of the things that is not being addressed, and I keep asking it, postpartum depression is a psychotic disorder. I don't know if y'all knew that. Y'all might have just learned something on today. Postpartum depression is a psychotic disorder. So please note that when you read through this bill text language, it never says what the psychotic disorder, it says schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. Everything you read is always going to say schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. So why should someone that has just birthed their child, who is currently undergoing whatever issues and concerns that are related to the hormonal imbalance of birthing a child, find themselves at a unfortunate, vulnerable space in which they can be remanded to care court? Because mind you could be remanded to care court by a family member, by a social worker, by law enforcement, or otherwise. So we think of the harms of that. We don't even have a grasp as a community on what postpartum depression looks like. We're learning what postpartum depression looks like. We're learning that, those that have miscarried their babies, stillbirthed their babies, are also able to experience postpartum depression. So there's many different ways in which we can think, of how this will harm gender identities. I don't have, exact knowledge in myself to speak, but I, will say I have been speaking with LGBTQ community members, specifically trans community members, and there is a concern in regards to the medications in which someone receives for hormone suppressants and the medications that they will potentially be forced to take. I would like to believe, as I have been speaking to these folks, that the state of California would not do something as ignorant as to inject medications into someone that would, potentially harm and or kill them based on their hormone suppressants that they receive. But see, when lawmakers aren't talking to people, they wouldn't even know that this is an issue and a concern from some LGBTQ community members, specifically trans. They are concerned. Whether that is a valid concern or not is not for us to determine. But this community of folks is definitely concerned that they may not be acknowledged for being a trans community member who takes hormone suppressants. And therefore, if they're forced to take another medication, will that result in their death? Will that result in an adverse reaction? I can't speak to it because I'm not of that community. So what do I need to do? I need to be intentional to make sure that I'm including that community in my discussions and in my conversations, because I wouldn't want to speak out ignorantly and poorly. But see, I'm an advocate and I know how to care for people. So I know that I can't represent a people of folks that I do not identify with. I can stand in solidarity and I can be an ally, but that's where my support lands.
Thanks. Sharon, at this point, do we have any questions that we should be fielding? Because I have a lot more, but I want to give the audience a chance to weigh in.
Thank you so much for, we have a lot of people on this call, and we have a lively discussion going on in the chat area, also and in the Q&A area. So much so that my recommendation is that we develop a document where we answer each and every question, and we send the document to all of the attendees, because I really want to continue to hear from you. Several of you, what comes to mind for me is Susan mentioned something about the cost of this. And I think we need to go further into this discussion, but we will answer every question, but we're gonna have to do it via email.
Great. Well, we have a few more minutes then for a general discussion, right? And I'm going to try to squeeze out then just a little bit more of why then, we have some explanation for why the governor might be doing this, may not be the most efficient thing. Couching it as care is going to be very attractive rhetorically and hard to debunk and point out how Orwellian it is. But now, as we're going forward, I'll start with you this time, Paul. You've been, and we'll wrap up with Susan and Shonika have the last word. Practically, where should we be going? What are the alternatives we should be pursuing, and as against this road down which we know destruction lies?
I mean, and that's where, and I'm sorry if I came across ultra negative earlier, but this stuff sucks. But like when we look at housing first, and then we see that HUD has eliminated over 800,000 units of affordable housing in the last 15 years. When we talk about care courts, mental health courts, substance abuse courts, homeless courts, while we're completely eliminating immigration courts, we eliminate a social safety net for all community members, and then we do community courts when young kids are acting out on the street corner. Like, what the hell is going on that we think the answer to it? I mean, it really harkens back to Reconstruction days. Like, the answer here is use the criminal justice system to recreate the system of oppression that you had. And it's just so like, I think it's the curse of the war on poverty in the 60s with the 501c3 industrial complex, where we're separating our issues from each other and we're losing our focus on human rights as the context and the heart and the spirit of the organizing that we're doing. And that this is not a unique court system. It's a new bill. And we've been doing this for a while now. And we have a whole collaborative courts association that is making millions of dollars off of funneling this system into a way of being. And then we end up, debating this supportive housing versus housing first versus transitional housing, when what created contemporary homelessness was neoliberalism and the total destruction of affordable housing for people. And everything has to be low-income housing tax credits and RAD and funneling systems of profit to corporate entities in order to have public parks and public schools. And we have business improvement districts running our neighborhoods. Like, neoliberalism is running amok in America, and we're debating over specific aspects of it, which is a legitimate fight, and we have to have those fights. But we can't lose the context that this is about what's commodified and what's available to people just because they're human beings. And if housing and education and treatment and access to those mutual benefits for everybody are commodities, then poor people are going to suffer, and they won't give education to poor people because they can't afford it, which is our freaking money. And so they build jails and prisons and institutions for us, and they build mansions for rich freaking people.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, I'm just trying to be uplifting and.
Yeah, no. This is the reality that we are all confronting now after this latest retrenchment that we've seen from the Supreme Court, right? This revanchism, right? This taking back of things. When I started teaching criminal law here at SC in '95, I taught the class through 2002, 96, 7, 8, 9, 2001, 2, up to 2003, that the government could make same-sex intimacy a felony and throw those people in a cage and lock them up for long periods of time. And when I was going through that case with my students this year and last year, they looked at me when I said, when do you think we finally, turned our back on this other approach? And they said, that had to have been in the 1800s, right, Professor? No, it was just in, but I thought for sure that was an achievement that I could never imagine us sliding back to a time when we would criminalize same-sex intimacy and throw people in a cage about it. We're looking at that now. Thomas has pointed in that direction. So, this is one of those kinds of moments when a lot of achievements and, kind of beachheads that we thought we had, landed on are being taken back. So in that light, Susan, I'm with Paul so far, gloom and doom. Do you have anything that you can say to us a little more optimistic? And I see Sharon getting ready to really put us on the tightest possible clock. So we only have a little time to say something.
1 minute.
I think I know that there's actions that are recommended. I believe that action makes a difference. We cannot be passive. As Ms. Williams pointed out, we were told there was no chance of this, and she convinced someone to put their political career on the line and vote against it. I think there are more people who will do that. It may be that they ask about the money. I mean, follow the money. People, just the conservatives, follow the money, as you're pointing out, Jody. But we need to slow this down long enough to reach more people and let them hear from us that this is absurd. It is irrational. It is nonsensical. It's the wrong approach.
Okay. So then we can only have 1 more minute from Ms. Williams, and then we're going to have a slide that's going to come up and show people how to take action.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm glad that there will be a slide to show folks how to take action. Please reach out to myself and other panelists I know will make themselves available. to continue this conversation, I will just say that there are assembly members that definitely want to do the right thing. We've spoken to them. Those of us a part of No Care Court, we've been speaking with them. They are concerned of how to do the right thing and also not get, blackballed here in the assembly. So would love strategies, would love ideas. There's folks working behind the scenes trying to figure out how to support this work. And I know that might sound disheartening because it's like, just do what you got to do. Just support us. We voted for you, right? But interestingly enough, it's a little bit deeper than that when this bill is coming down for Governor Newsom, right? And there's other policies and laws that these folks are trying to do for Black and Brown communities and for all. So thank you all for your time on today. Thank you for allowing us to be vulnerable, to speak, our truths, but as well as, the facts and the information. And I hope you gained and learned a lot and look forward to you participating. You're always welcome to join No Care Court if you are in 100% opposition of SB 1338. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to thank our fantastic moderator, Jody Armour, and Shonique Williams, Susan Misner, and Paul Bowden, and our captioner, Sabrina Crosby. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to ask that the slide be put up on the screen. So I want to talk about the dozens of organizations that are working in coalition to put an end to this terrible this care court, and our mantra is #NoCareCourt. There are dozens of well-regarded organizations, including Loyola Law School, the ACLU California Action, the Western Regional Advocacy Project, National Health Law Program. And here are some of the things that you can do if you want to join those organizations in opposition to AB 2830. You can take steps right now to put pressure on the Assembly Health Committee to vote no on this dangerous bill. And you can post on social media and tag the Assembly Health Committee members. Now, we're going to be sending you a package with links to all of these organizations and a package with the hashtag and all the information that you need in order to take action. We'd like, again, to thank everyone who participated in today's extremely informative presentation. And we encourage you to continue to support the ACLU and to support the important work that all of the coalition partners are doing. Thank you so much for being with us. That concludes our program.
No shit, we're done.
Yes, but we want to save the chat. So Armelinda, we want to save the chat, and we also want to save the Q&A so that each of you can answer those questions and we can prepare the document. So
yeah, Armelinda, once we have everything saved, then I think we can close everything out.
Do we want to discuss how we're answering